Welcome, dear listener, to Family Shadows, a place where quiet sacrifices and hidden truths of fathers come to light. If you find yourself moved by these stories, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. Every week, we bring you tales of family, respect, and the moments that change us forever. Today's story is titled, "My son-in-law forbade me from the family vacation, but he forgot who paid for it all." Let's begin. Henry Walker was 62 years old, and though his hair had thinned at the crown, his heart still carried the eager beat of a boy planning for summer. The first day of June had arrived with sunlight splintering across the old pine trees that lined his street. It was the kind of morning that carried the promise of warmth and laughter, the kind of morning that whispered, "Vacation season has begun." Henry had spent the last 2 weeks quietly preparing for this trip. His daughter Emily had mentioned it in passing over dinner one Sunday. "We're thinking of going down to Myrtle Beach this year," she had said, sliding mashed potatoes onto Sophie's plate. Jason, her husband, nodded while scrolling on his phone. Henry had smiled then, not saying much. He didn't want to seem too eager, too assuming. But the thought of sand under his feet and salty air in his lungs had made him feel young again. It had been years since he'd gone on any trip beyond the county fair or the occasional visit to his sister's farm. So, in his quiet way, he prepared. He polished the old leather suitcase that had belonged to his late wife, Margaret. The brass buckles still shone when the sun caught them right, and the smell of aged leather reminded him of the road trips they used to take, windows down, radio playing some soft country tune, her laughter filling the air. Inside, he folded his shirts carefully, rolling socks the way Margaret had taught him. He even slipped in a deck of playing cards. Sophie loved to play Go Fish with him, and Ethan, though younger, had a knack for hiding the jokers when nobody was looking. Henry imagined the kids' squeals of laughter in a hotel room, the family gathered around after a day in the sun. This vacation wasn't just a trip. For Henry, it was a chance to belong again, to be part of the living, breathing pulse of his family. That morning, Henry dressed in his best summer shirt, a pale blue button-down that matched the sky. He dabbed on a bit of aftershave, the kind that still lingered faintly of cedar, and packed a paperback novel into the side pocket of his suitcase. He stepped outside with a small spring in his step, suitcase rolling gently on the gravel drive. The sound of children's voices carried down from the house where Emily and Jason lived, just a few doors away. Sophie's giggles, Ethan shouting something about his bucket and spade. Henry's heart swelled. He thought, this is what life is meant to be, 3 generations bound together by something as simple as a family vacation. He arrived at the curb just as Jason was loading their SUV. The back hatch was open, revealing neatly stacked bags, coolers, and beach chairs. Jason wore his usual baseball cap, turned backward, and a sharp frown. "Morning, Jason," Henry greeted warmly. "I've got my bag here, should fit right on top." He lifted his suitcase, ready to place it in the back. That's when it happened. Jason's hand shot out, blocking him. His voice came out colder than the shade under the oaks. "Dad, you're not going." At first, Henry thought he had misheard. His hand lingered on the suitcase handle. "What was that?" he asked, searching Jason's face for some sign of humor. Jason didn't flinch. "You're not coming with us. This is our vacation. Just me, Emily, and the kids." The words struck Henry like stones. Behind Jason, he could see Emily standing near the front porch, arms folded tightly, eyes darting nervously. Sophie and Ethan were chasing each other across the lawn, unaware of the storm brewing. Henry swallowed. "But I thought Emily mentioned." Jason cut him off. "Yeah, well, I decided it's better this way. We need space. The kids need their parents, not a tag-along. You'll be fine here." Tag-along, the word stung. Emily's lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but Jason's glare froze her in place. Henry felt the weight of silence pressing in. The birds still chirped, the morning sun still warmed his shoulders, but inside a chill spread through him. He looked at his suitcase, so carefully packed with hope and memory, and then at Jason, the man who had taken his daughter's hand but now seemed determined to push Henry's away. Henry didn't argue. He couldn't. Years of being a father had taught him that sometimes silence carried more dignity than words. So, he lifted his suitcase back onto the ground, nodded once, and whispered, "I see." Jason muttered something under his breath, already turning back to the car, already moving on. But for Henry, time slowed. He saw Sophie pause her game to wave at him, her little voice carrying across the yard. "Grandpa, you're coming too, right?" Henry's throat tightened. Emily rushed forward, scooping Sophie into her arms before Henry could answer. "Come on, sweetie, let Grandpa rest. We'll see him later." The car doors slammed. The engine roared to life. Henry stood at the curb, suitcase by his side, watching the vehicle pull away in a cloud of dust. And as it disappeared down the road, so too did the image he had built in his mind. The hotel room laughter, the go-fish games, the salty air shared together. Back in his quiet house, Henry placed the suitcase by the bed. He didn't unpack. He couldn't. Each shirt folded inside was a reminder of where he was not, of a family trip he had helped make possible in ways Jason could not yet fathom. For you see, Henry knew something Jason had conveniently forgotten, or perhaps had chosen never to ask. The reservations, the down payment, the very credit card that had secured their sunny week at the shore, those had all come from Henry's hand. Not as a boast, not as leverage, but as love. And as he sat in the stillness of his home, the words echoed in his mind. "You're not going." The injustice was sharp, the loneliness sharper, but Henry Walker was not a man easily broken. He whispered to the photo of Margaret on the mantel, "They'll remember. One way or another, they'll remember." Henry spent the rest of the morning sitting in his chair by the window, the one that faced the street where the mail truck usually came around noon. His suitcase remained by the bed upstairs, still zipped shut, still waiting for a trip that had already left without him. The silence of the house was not new. He had lived with it since Margaret passed. But today it carried a different weight. This silence was not just absence, it was rejection. By mid-afternoon, Henry decided he couldn't sit there staring at the empty road any longer. He walked slowly to Emily's house. Maybe, he thought, it had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe Emily would open the door and smile that soft smile of hers, the one she inherited from her mother, and say, "Dad, of course you're coming. Jason just lost his temper." But when he reached the porch, he found the front door wide open. Emily stood inside, arms folded, while Jason barked orders about last-minute items. "We don't need to bring the big cooler," Jason was saying. "It takes up too much room, just leave it." "But the kids," Emily began. Jason snapped, "We'll buy drinks there, enough arguing." Henry cleared his throat gently, not wanting to intrude but unable to remain invisible. "Emily," he said softly. She turned, startled. "Dad, I thought you went home." "I did," Henry admitted. "But I just wanted to ask, did you mean for me to stay behind, or was that Jason's decision?" Jason appeared in the doorway, face hard as stone. "It was my decision, Henry. We talked about this. We want space. You being there makes things complicated." Henry's chest tightened. "Complicated how? I just wanted to spend time with my daughter, with my grandkids." "Is that so?" Jason cut him off with a short, bitter laugh. Do you even hear yourself? You hover. You make Emily feel guilty if she doesn't spend every second with you. You spoil the kids with your old stories and your outdated ways. This is a family trip, Henry, our family. You're not part of this. The words hit Henry like a blow to the ribs. Not part of this. He looked at Emily, praying she would step forward, put a hand on his arm, say something, anything. But Emily only lowered her eyes, twisting her fingers together. Dad, maybe Jason's right. Maybe it would be easier this time if you stayed. Henry's voice cracked. Easier for who? Emily flinched. Please, don't make this harder. Henry could feel the blood rushing in his ears. He wanted to shout, to demand gratitude, to remind them both of what he had given and given without question, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he whispered, I see, and stepped back. Jason shut the door firmly, leaving Henry on the porch. As Henry turned to leave, a small voice piped up from the side yard. Grandpa. It was Sophie, her braids bouncing as she ran toward him, Ethan trailing behind with a plastic shovel in his hand. Why aren't you getting in the car? Aren't you coming to the beach with us? Sophie's eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Henry crouched down, trying to steady his trembling hands. Not this time, sweetheart. Why not? Ethan asked, confused. We saved you a seat next to us. I was going to show you my bucket. Henry forced a smile that hurt more than tears. Sometimes grown-ups make choices we don't understand. But you too. He touched Sophie's shoulder and ruffled Ethan's hair. You have fun for me, all right. Build the biggest sandcastle you can and think of me when the waves come. Sophie's lips quivered, but I wanted you there. I wanted that too, Henry admitted softly. Emily called from inside the house, her voice sharp with urgency. Kids, come on, we're leaving. The children hesitated, torn between the warmth of their grandfather's presence and the command of their mother. Finally, Sophie hugged Henry's neck tightly, whispering, I'll miss you. Ethan did the same, his little arms clinging with all the strength of a 6-year-old. Henry held them as long as he could before gently letting go. Go on, he said. Don't keep your parents waiting. They scampered back to the car, looking over their shoulders until Jason herded them inside. When the SUV finally rolled down the driveway, Henry stood rooted to the spot. He watched as taillights flickered and then vanished around the corner. He felt like a man who had been erased. Not shouted at, not argued with, but quietly erased from the picture of their lives. The porch creaked under his feet as he stepped down and began the slow walk home. Each step echoed the truth Jason had thrown at him. You're not part of this. Inside his house, Henry sank into his armchair, staring at the mantel where Margaret's photo stood framed in oak. Her smile, forever frozen in that picture from a summer picnic years ago, seemed to ask him silently, what happened to us? Henry closed his eyes, whispering to her memory. I don't know, Maggie. I don't know how we became strangers in their eyes. The house answered with silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. And though Henry's lips never spoke it aloud, a question lodged itself deep in his heart. If love and sacrifice aren't enough to keep you in your own family's circle, what is? The house had grown too large for one man. Henry Walker realized this every time he stepped into the kitchen and found 3 chairs empty. Every time he opened the pantry and noticed the boxes of cereal that nobody but the grandkids touched. That evening, after watching the taillights of Emily's SUV disappear down the street, Henry brewed himself a cup of tea. He let the kettle whistle longer than necessary, its shrill cry filling the hollow silence. Margaret used to scold him for that. You'll burn the bottom, Henry. Don't let it scream like that. He smiled faintly at the memory, then poured the boiling water into his chipped mug. The chair across from him was empty. It had been empty for nearly 7 years. He kept expecting Margaret to walk in, apron tied around her waist, humming some hymn under her breath. But all that remained was her picture on the mantel and the memories stitched into the corners of the house. Henry held the warm mug between his palms and stared at the photograph. "They left without me, Maggie," he whispered. "Jason said I don't belong." Emily didn't argue. His voice cracked on that last part. He could bear Jason's contempt, that was nothing new. But Emily, his little girl, the one he used to carry on his shoulders at the county fair, the one who once told him she wanted to marry a man just like Daddy, her silence hurt more than Jason's words ever could. After dinner, Henry wandered upstairs and opened the suitcase he had packed so carefully. He unfolded a faded Hawaiian shirt, the one Margaret had bought him for their 20th anniversary trip to Key West. He remembered her laughter when he tried it on, claiming he looked like a retiree ready to dance on the beach. Next came the deck of playing cards. He shuffled them slowly, the sound of cardboard slipping against cardboard echoing in the quiet bedroom. He had planned to teach Sophie how to play rummy this trip, to show Ethan how to build a card house. He placed the deck on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the open suitcase. Was I foolish to think they'd want me there? He asked the empty room. Did I make myself believe I was needed when I wasn't? The silence answered. Henry closed the suitcase again, this time with a heaviness that settled in his chest. Later that night, Henry walked into his workshop out back. The scent of sawdust still clung to the air, though he hadn't touched the lathe in weeks. On the workbench lay a half-finished birdhouse, the kind Margaret used to paint in bright colors for the yard. He traced the wood grain with his fingertips, thinking of all the things he had built with these hands, tables, chairs, even the cradle Emily once slept in. These hands had shaped a home, provided for a family, repaired broken hinges and scraped knees alike. And yet today, those same hands had been told they were unnecessary. He spoke softly, as though Margaret were listening from the other room. "I thought if I stayed useful, if I kept showing up, they'd always make room for me. But maybe Jason's right. Maybe I am just an old man who doesn't fit in their world anymore." He paused, gripping the edge of the workbench until his knuckles widened. "But Maggie, you know me. I can't shout. I can't fight them with words. All I can do is wait and hope they remember who I've been for them." The next morning, Henry rose early. The habit of decades still pulled him out of bed before the sun. He brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the street that led out of town. Somewhere down that road, his family was probably stopping for breakfast, the kids begging for pancakes at a diner. Jason would be impatient, Emily quietly trying to keep peace. Henry could picture it all, every detail, because he had lived those rhythms himself when Emily was small. He sipped his coffee slowly, letting the bitterness ground him. The neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or jogged past. A few asked why he wasn't away with his family. Henry forced a polite smile and answered vaguely, "Didn't work out this time." No one pressed further. Small towns are like that. They see more than they ask. But Henry felt the weight of each unspoken question. That night, before bed, Henry opened a drawer in his desk. Inside were the papers he had tucked away weeks earlier. The booking confirmation, the credit card receipt, the itinerary he had printed out on his old inkjet printer. He had been the one to make it all happen. The trip wasn't Jason's idea, though Jason paraded it as his own. Emily had mentioned the dream, the kids had begged for the beach, and Henry had quietly called the travel agency, quietly paid the deposit, quietly signed his name. Not to boast, not for recognition, but because that's what fathers do. He ran his fingers over the papers, his jaw tightening. "They don't know," he murmured, "but they will." Henry Walker was a silent man, yes, but silence did not mean weakness. Sometimes silence was the sound of patience. Sometimes silence was the pause before truth spoke louder than shouting ever could. And in that quiet, Henry decided, when the moment came, he would remind them, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the simple, undeniable truth. The days passed slowly. Each morning Henry brewed his coffee. Each evening he sat in his workshop, his hands busy with small tasks that didn't really need doing, sanding a piece of wood already smooth, rearranging tools that were already in their place. Work had always been his language, the way he kept despair from creeping in too close. But even as he tried to fill the hours, the absence of his family pressed against him. He thought often of Sophie and Ethan, imagined them shrieking as the waves rushed their ankles, imagined the way Emily would dab sunscreen on their noses while Jason scrolled through his phone. Henry pictured himself there among them, his laughter blending with theirs, his hand steadying Ethan as he dug a moat around his sandcastle. Instead, he was here, alone, waiting for updates that never came. On the third evening, Henry decided to walk to the edge of town. Sometimes moving his body helped calm the ache in his chest. When he returned, passing by Emily's house, he noticed the kitchen window left slightly open. The lights glowed warm inside. He slowed, not out of nosiness but out of longing. The sound of voices floated out, carried by the summer air. Jason's voice, sharp and dismissive. "I told you, Em, I don't want your dad tagging along in the future either. He's exhausting. He makes everything about him." Henry froze. Emily's voice came softer, hesitant. "But he doesn't mean to. He just wants to be included." Jason scoffed. "Included? He had his life, his vacations, his time. This is ours now. We don't need an old man slowing us down, turning every dinner into some trip down memory lane. The kids don't need constant stories about what things cost 30 years ago or how he used to fix everything himself. They need me. They need modern parents, not a relic from another time." Henry's breath caught. "A relic," Emily sighed. "He paid for this trip, Jason." Jason's reply was swift, dripping with contempt. "And that doesn't buy him a ticket to everything. He wanted to help, fine, but I'm not giving him control, not in this family, not ever." Henry staggered back, the night air suddenly colder. His own daughter's kitchen, the very place he had once helped repair a broken faucet, was now a courtroom where his worth was being argued and denied. He turned away. His steps slow, heavy, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes like accusations. Back in his house, Henry lowered himself into his chair. He rubbed his temples, trying to steady the pounding in his head. A relic. The word repeated itself. He looked around the room, the photographs, the furniture he had built, the memories infused in every wall. Was that all he was now? A piece of the past, tolerated only when convenient, dismissed when inconvenient. His hands trembled as he reached for Margaret's photo again. "Did you hear him, Maggie? Did you hear what he thinks of me? That I don't belong, that I'm nothing but a burden." The silence pressed in, but Henry could almost imagine her voice, steady and kind. "You're not a burden. You've carried them longer than they know. One day they'll see it." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the tears come, quiet, steady, like rain on the roof. Over the next few days, Henry tried to keep himself occupied. He fixed the loose step on his porch. He repainted the mailbox. He cooked meals too big for one and ended up storing leftovers in neat containers. But the storm inside him grew heavier. Every time he passed Emily's house, he felt the sting of Jason's words. Every time he saw other families loading their cars for vacations, he felt the ache of exclusion sharpen. He began to notice things he hadn't before. How often Jason parked his car in Henry's driveway without asking. How Jason borrowed Henry's tools and never returned them. How Jason spoke over Emily at every neighborhood gathering. Henry kept his silence. He always had. But silence was no longer peace. It was pressure, building, waiting for the moment when truth could no longer be contained. And deep in his chest, Henry knew that moment was coming. The day they arrived at Myrtle Beach, the photos began. Henry saw them not because Emily sent them, she hadn't, but because neighbors, friends from church, even distant cousins tagged him on social media. Someone had shared Emily's cheerful post. A family of 4, framed against the wide Atlantic horizon. The kids grinning with plastic shovels in their hands, Emily's hair whipped back by the wind, Jason's arm slung confidently around her shoulder. The caption read, "Family time at last, much-needed getaway." Henry stared at the glowing screen on his old laptop, the edges of the photo bleeding into his dimly lit kitchen. His hand hovered over the keyboard, tempted to type something, anything, but what could he say? "Glad you're having fun, wish I was there." No, that would sound bitter. "Have a great trip." No, that would feel like a lie. Instead, he closed the laptop slowly, the click echoing in the empty room. Henry spent the next few days filling his hours with the rhythm of habit. He mowed the lawn, though it barely needed mowing. He cleaned out the garage, lining up old jars of screws and bolts as if their order might bring order to his heart. Each evening he sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the sweat dripping down its sides, and imagined what they were doing. He pictured Sophie chasing seagulls across the sand, Ethan squealing as the cold surf touched his ankles. He imagined Emily applying sunscreen while Jason scrolled through his phone, too busy to notice the fleeting joy of childhood. Henry smiled sadly at the thought, his chest tightening with longing. Sometimes he whispered into the wind, "I should be there." But the wind never answered. On the 4th day, Emily finally called. Henry's phone rang as he sat in his workshop, oiling the hinges of a drawer. The sound startled him. It had been days since anyone reached out. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered, trying to sound casual. "Dad." Emily's voice came, threaded with background noise, waves, laughter, the faint screech of seagulls. "Emily." His chest loosened just hearing her. "How's the trip?" "It's good, the kids are having fun." She hesitated. "They wanted to talk to you." Henry's lips curved into the first true smile in days. "Put them on." Sophie's voice burst through, bright as the sun. "Grandpa, I made the biggest sandcastle ever. It had towers and everything, but the waves knocked it down." Henry chuckled. "That's the thing about castles by the sea, sweetheart. They're beautiful for a moment, then the tide reminds us to build again." Ethan shouted, "I found seashells. I'll bring you one, Grandpa, a big one." Henry swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I can't wait to see it, buddy." For a few minutes he was with them, not in body but in spirit, present in their laughter, their excitement, their innocent love. Then Jason's voice cut in from the background. "Emily, we're going to miss the dinner reservation. Wrap it up." The call ended shortly after. Henry set the phone down gently, the silence rushing back like the tide after a wave. That evening, far away at the beachside restaurant, Jason raised a glass of wine in celebration. "To family," he declared. Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Sophie and Ethan giggled, clinking their plastic cups of lemonade against their parents' glasses. Jason leaned back, surveying the table, pride radiating from him. He had orchestrated it all, or so he believed, the trip, the meals, the laughter. In his mind, he was the provider, the leader, the man who made this family what it was. But beneath the polished surface, cracks showed. Emily's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The children asked about Grandpa 3 times during dinner, and when the check arrived, Jason reached for his wallet only to pause, frowning at the slip of paper, the details typed neatly across the top. Reservation secured by H. Walker. He stuffed the receipt into his pocket quickly, hoping Emily hadn't noticed, but she had. And the weight of that truth sat between them like an unspoken guest. Meanwhile, Henry sat at his kitchen table, a simple meal before him, meatloaf and green beans, leftovers from the night before. The contrast between his quiet dinner and their lavish seaside feast might have broken another man, but Henry did not crumble. He ate slowly, methodically, as though each bite were fuel for a deeper resolve. When he finished, he cleared the table, washed the dishes, and returned to his desk. He pulled out the folder once more, the receipts, the booking confirmations, the bank statement showing his payment for the trip in full. He laid them out carefully, as though preparing evidence for a trial. His jaw tightened, his heart steadied. "The day will come," he murmured, "and when it does, they'll know." The storm inside Henry Walker had grown silent but not weaker. It gathered strength in the stillness, waiting for the moment when silence would break like thunder across the sky. The ocean was calm that evening, a sheet of silver stretching out beneath the fading sun. The resort's dining hall glowed with warm lights, its tall windows reflecting both the sea and the chatter of vacationing families. Plates clinked, children laughed, waiters weaved between tables balancing trays of seafood and wine. Jason Miller was in his element. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over Emily's shoulder, the other gesturing animatedly as he spoke about the round of golf he had booked for the next morning. "Best course in the state," he boasted, loud enough for the table beside them to overhear. "I've been meaning to play it for years. Finally, we're living a little." Emily smiled faintly, her fork idling on her plate. Sophie and Ethan squirmed in their chairs, tired from a long day at the beach. The children had been chattering about their sandcastle earlier, but Jason had waved them quiet, insisting on telling his story uninterrupted. The waiter arrived with the check, setting it down with a polite nod. Jason snatched it up, ready to perform the role of provider, but the moment his eyes scanned the paper, his jaw tightened. There it was again, the same small notation as before. Reservation secured by H. Walker. Jason's face flushed red. He stuffed the receipt into his pocket, glancing at Emily, who met his eyes with quiet knowing. She said nothing, but the silence between them deepened. Just as Jason raised his glass to mask his irritation, a figure appeared at the entrance of the dining hall. Henry Walker. He wasn't dressed for spectacle. Just his best pale blue shirt pressed neatly, and the leather shoes Margaret had bought him years ago. His shoulders were straight, his step steady, but there was a gravity to his presence that made heads turn. Emily's fork froze midair. Sophie let out a delighted squeal, "Grandpa," and half rose from her chair before Jason hissed her name, forcing her back down. Ethan's eyes went wide, joy spilling across his face. Jason set down his glass hard enough to rattle the silverware. What the hell is he doing here? Henry walked calmly across the dining room. He wasn't rushing, wasn't timid. He moved with the quiet assurance of a man who had built houses with his own hands, raised children on a single paycheck, and carried grief without letting it break him. When he reached the table, he nodded politely to Emily, bent down to kiss Sophie's forehead, and ruffled Ethan's hair. Only then did he straighten and meet Jason's glare head-on. "Evening," Henry said evenly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jason's face hardened. "You are." The surrounding tables had grown quiet, the natural hush of strangers sensing tension they couldn't quite place. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting her napkin. Henry didn't raise his voice. "I thought I'd join you for dinner. After all, I am a part of this family." Jason leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "We talked about this. You're not wanted here. This is our vacation." Henry's eyes softened, though his jaw remained firm. "Our." He glanced at Emily, then back at Jason. "I suppose that word means different things to different people." Sophie piped up, her child's honesty slicing through the tension. "But Grandpa, you paid for the trip, didn't you? Mommy said so." Jason slammed his palm against the table. "Enough, Sophie." The girl shrank back, eyes wide, tears forming. Ethan's lower lip trembled. Emily reached for them both, her own face pale with shame. Henry exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was no longer about a vacation. This was about dignity, about truth. The waiter returned just then, balancing a tray of desserts, oblivious to the storm brewing at the table. He set the plates down, cheesecake, a dish of ice cream for the children, and retreated quickly, sensing the tension in the air. Henry placed a hand on the back of Sophie's chair, steadying her. "It's all right, sweetheart," he said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." Then, turning back to Jason, his voice firmed. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to remind you of something you seem to have forgotten." Jason sneered. "And what's that?" Henry reached into the inside pocket of his shirt, his movements unhurried, deliberate. His fingers found the folded papers he had carried with him all along, the receipts, the confirmations, the proof no one could dispute. He laid them down on the white tablecloth, right between Jason's wine glass and Emily's trembling hand. Jason's eyes darted to the papers, then back to Henry. A flicker of panic crossed his face. Henry's voice was low but carried through the room. "You may have told me I don't belong, but the truth is this trip, this table, these moments, you're sitting here because of me. I paid for it all, not for thanks, not for recognition, but because I love my family." The silence that followed was sharper than any shout. Jason's mouth opened, then closed again. His face burned crimson, his hand tightening around the stem of his glass until Emily reached across, touching his wrist lightly, urging him not to break it. Sophie looked up at Henry with awe. Ethan grinned, whispering, "I knew it." Emily's eyes filled with tears. The storm had arrived. And Henry Walker, the man they had tried to silence, had spoken louder than ever, without raising his voice. The papers lay on the table like a gavel in a courtroom. No one touched them, but everyone could feel their weight. Jason's jaw clenched as he stared at the neat folds of white. His fingers twitched as though tempted to crumple them up and throw them aside, but something in Henry's steady gaze kept him frozen. Emily's hand trembled as she reached forward, lifting the top sheet with careful fingers. Her eyes moved across the words, confirmation numbers, reservation dates, the charge made to Henry Walker's account. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with the realization. "It's true," she whispered. Jason shot her a sharp look, but she didn't meet his eyes. Sophie leaned across the table, peering at the paper in her mother's hands. "Grandpa, you paid for all of this." Henry smiled gently at her. Yes, sweetheart, the hotel, the meals, even your bucket and spade waiting by the shore. I wanted you and your brother to have a summer to remember. Ethan clapped his hands, innocent joy spilling from him. I told you Grandpa's the best. Jason's face darkened. You had no right. Henry turned his gaze back to him, calm but unyielding. No right to care for my family, to give them something you couldn't. Jason's chair scraped loudly against the tile as he leaned forward, his voice low and furious. You made me look weak. Henry shook his head. No, Jason, you did that yourself. The dining hall had grown quieter. Strangers at nearby tables tried not to stare, but their forks moved slower, their conversations hushed. They were witnesses now, drawn into a family storm too raw to ignore. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She pressed the papers flat against the table as if smoothing them could also smooth the rift widening before her. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Henry's voice softened. Because love doesn't need to be announced, Emily. It just needs to be lived. I wanted you happy, not burdened by who paid the bill. That's what your mother and I always did. We gave quietly. That's what family is supposed to be. His words carried a steady ache, the kind born not from anger but from years of sacrifice unrecognized. Jason, cornered, grasped for control. So what? You think that buys you a seat at this table, that a few receipts make you the hero? Henry's eyes did not waver. It's not about a seat, it's about respect. Something you forgot when you told me I didn't belong. Jason looked around the room, suddenly aware of the eyes fixed on him. He felt the judgment pressing in, the silent verdict of strangers. His bluster faltered. Emily finally found her voice, fragile but firm. Jason, enough. Dad's done more for us than either of us can admit. I should have stood up for him. I should have told you no when you said he couldn't come. And now I'm ashamed that I didn't. Jason's face twisted, caught between anger and humiliation. He opened his mouth, but Emily's eyes, wet and blazing, stopped him. For once, just stop, she whispered. Sophie reached for Henry's hand across the table. Ethan followed, his small fingers wrapping around his grandfather's weathered ones. Between them, the papers lay like a quiet crown of truth. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at Jason one last time, his tone even, resolute. You told me I wasn't part of this family. But families aren't built on who shouts the loudest or claims the most credit. They're built on who shows up, who sacrifices, who remembers that love means carrying the weight for each other, even when no one notices. He stood slowly, pushing back his chair with a soft scrape. I don't need your thanks, but I won't let you erase me either. Jason sat rigid, red-faced, words caught in his throat. Emily's tears spilled silently down her cheeks. The children clung tighter to their grandfather's hands. Henry gathered the papers, folded them neatly, and slipped them back into his pocket. He looked at Emily, his voice breaking just slightly. I only ever wanted to be with you, that's all. Then, with the same quiet dignity he had carried his whole life, Henry turned and walked out of the dining hall. The room remained hushed long after he was gone, the storm he left behind echoing louder than any raised voice could have. The night air outside the resort was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and grilled shrimp from the boardwalk. Henry walked slowly, his shoes tapping softly against the wooden planks. Behind him, the dining hall glowed with light and noise. But he no longer belonged to that room, that table, that scene. He stopped near the edge of the pier, leaning against the railing. The ocean stretched out before him, dark and endless, waves folding into each other like whispers. He let the breeze wash over him, steadying the ache in his chest. For a long time, Henry said nothing. He simply breathed as if the sea itself might absorb his sorrow. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. He turned, surprised to see Emily running toward him, her sandals clapping against the wood. Her hair was loose, her eyes swollen from tears. "Dad," she called, breathless. "Wait." Henry straightened, his face composed though his heart raced. "Emily, you should be inside with your family." She stopped a few feet away, shaking her head. "You are my family. I've been blind to it, letting Jason's pride silence me. I should have defended you. I should have remembered all the times you carried me, literally and figuratively, when no one else would." Her voice cracked and she stepped closer, reaching for his hand. "I'm sorry, Dad, truly, for not speaking up, for letting him push you aside. You've done everything for us and I let him make you feel small." Henry squeezed her hand gently, his eyes soft. "You don't owe me apologies, Emily. You owe yourself honesty. You let him draw the circle too small. Don't let him erase the people who love you most." Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I won't anymore. The kids adore you. I adore you. And no one can take that away." For the first time in days, Henry felt something loosen inside his chest. A small voice rang out across the pier. "Grandpa." Sophie came running, Ethan stumbling behind her. They collided with Henry's legs, wrapping their arms around him. "Don't go," Sophie pleaded. "We want you with us." Henry knelt, pulling them into his arms. Their innocence, their love was pure and untarnished by adult pride. He kissed the tops of their heads, whispering, "I'll always be with you. Even if I'm not sitting at every table, I'm part of you. Don't ever forget that." Ethan held up a seashell he had been clutching all evening. It was chipped, imperfect, but beautiful in its own way. "I saved this for you, Grandpa. It's yours." Henry took it gently, his throat tight. "Thank you, buddy. I'll keep it forever." Jason never followed them onto the pier. Perhaps he couldn't face the truth, or perhaps he simply didn't know how to swallow his pride. But Henry didn't need his approval anymore. The love of his daughter, the loyalty of his grandchildren, and the knowledge of his own quiet sacrifices were enough. As the waves lapped against the shore, Henry stood with Emily at his side and Sophie and Ethan clinging to his hands. He thought of Margaret then, how proud she would be, how she would remind him that love, when given freely, was never wasted. Henry exhaled, the tension easing at last. "Family," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else, "isn't about who controls the table. It's about who builds it and who keeps it standing." Emily nodded, her face lit faintly by the glow of the boardwalk lights. "And you've been building it all along, Dad." The lesson of that summer was not shouted. It was lived. Henry Walker, the man once told he didn't belong, had proven that true belonging comes not from permission but from love, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Respect is not a gift to be granted at someone's whim. It is a recognition earned by years of devotion, by the unseen hands that built every foundation the younger ones now stand upon. And though Jason's arrogance cast a shadow over those days, Henry's truth shone brighter, reminding them all that the silent sacrifices of fathers are the beams that hold a family together. Thank you, dear friends, for joining us for this story on Family Shadows. May it remind you of the quiet strength of fathers and the respect that love deserves. We wish you health, peace, and happiness with your families. Hold your loved ones close, for time is fleeting and love, when cherished, lasts far beyond the moment. Until next time, take care of yours.